Hello and welcome to PSG Review. We are busy preparing for the first major match of the season against Arsenal, and we have a lot of hope with our men's team despite all the injuries that are darkening our doorstep. And the women's team, well, absolutely no hope left as the season has been irreversibly compromised after only 3 matches played. A total collapse on that side.
You are listening to PSG Review. Here's your host, Mikko.
It's not all doom and gloom, not at all. Although with PSG women, it is what it is. But we get into that later, and that's been a long time coming. We didn't fall off the wagon this week. This week we just hit the ground, and it was inevitable. But let's not worry about it right now, because we have essentially a pretty positive show for you today, despite this very start of it. Because PSG was showing a boatload of promise against Stade Rennes, which isn't an easy team to beat. And we have struggled against them many times, but now they had no chance for 3 points as PSG had the last chance to figure the form back up before the trip to London and Arsenal. And PSG did get their ABCs in order after a few forgettable matches, and I don't even mean Cardi B and Central C, who were at the stadium. On top of these mainstream rap stars, there was also Jimmy Butler, who was a basketball player in NBA. So stars were in the stands, but the star on the pitch, it was the collective, even if Cardi B wanted to join the PSG Ultras.
I want to be over there. This side is mad quiet. Like, I don't want to sit with the bougie people. I want to sit with the rats. Sit me with the rats.
Do not worry, PSG Review isn't becoming an entertainment show about pop stars and such. It's a Paris Fashion Week, and that brought the stars out. Although PSG had some sort of a collaboration going on with the UK MC Central C around this third kit, which they played with, and in specific the print at the back of the shirt. And let me say this first, I was not a huge fan of this new Jordan kit. Pink is not my aesthetic, but it looked okay on the pitch, better than I expected, and the team played very well. And that's the thing, you might not always like the kit, but if you associate it with good football, it sort of raises up a few notches in your estimation. Early days, of course, but reasonable start for it. PSG with quite a few absentees on top of the long-term unavailable players such as Lucas Hernandez, Presnel Kimpembe and Gonzalo Ramos. Also not on the list were Gianluigi Donnarumma, who I hope will be back for Arsenal. Also injuries or smaller issues with Vitinha, Desiree Doué, Nuno Mendes and Marco Asensio. Our issue with the squad depth is really testing us early on this season. Peralta was standing in for Nuno. On midfield, we of course have Fabian Ruiz, European champion, who can come instead of Vitinha. And in attack, well, I was thinking that how many players must be injured before Randal Colomwani is a starter, but in all fairness, the real news of this match was that Lee Kang-in was our false 9, and what a solution that was by Luis Enrique. I think that the South Korean should stay there until we get our proper 9 back in Gonzalo Ramos, but great match by Lee Kang-in and great vision by Luis Enrique to put him there. Now, I had this feeling, and I'll say that to claim any credit for it, of course, it was a fairly easy thing to guess, but I had the feeling that this could be the comeback match for Bradley Barcola. Not that he had even really gone anywhere for that much. He has had a few matches where he wasn't at his absolute best, which is very normal, of course. No cause for alarm. But obviously, if it is inconveniently timed, it feels like a bigger problem than what it actually is. And I think he may have even been working through some flu or something like that. I feel like I read somewhere that there could have been some minor health issues that can nevertheless impact the form. I'm not sure. I feel like I saw, read or heard it somewhere. Don't quote me on that one, but even if there wasn't, he's a young guy who didn't give us fireworks against Girona and Reims, but he certainly hit the ground running against Rennes. The Brittany team with players such as Titi Parisien, Arnaud Kalimuendo, the always dangerous Ludovic Blas, who has been one of my favorite non-PSG players in Ligue 1 for quite a few years, while he was in Nantes before, or Amin Geri, Steve Madanda in goal, and a bunch of other players there in the mix, but I would say that they were incredibly lucky to keep the scoreline 0-0 as long as they did on the first half. Marquinhos had scored very early on in the match, but it was deemed to have been an offside goal after a lengthy VAR inspection, and there were other chances by Dembele, who, in all fairness, could have scored 2 goals and should have scored at least 1 goal, I think, but finally he did give an assist to our first goal, from which a sizable credit also goes to João Neves, who was creating the chance in the midfield. Then Dembele and Barcola ran towards Mandanda, and Dembele did exactly what he was supposed to with the ball. He forced the defenders to come and cover him until Barcola was pretty much a free player, and then a precise assist to him, and PSG was leading 1-0 at Parc des Princes. That was also the scoreline at the half-time. It could have been more, but it wasn't, and to be fair with you, of course, Rennes wasn't playing in a way that could not have resulted in a goal. We know what they can do, but just to say the control of the match was fairly comfortable in our hands, or feet, or whatever. At 58 minutes, Barcola was at it again, but this time his very nearly perfect shot bounced from the woodwork, and from that Lee Kang-in, another master of that night, last night as I'm recording this, day after on Saturday, Lee headed the ball in, and finally 10 minutes later from a boot of Achraf Hakimi, a pretty much perfect cross, and this time Bradley Barcola didn't have to perform a miracle, but rather just to be there, make the run and tap the ball in. PSG started the rotation around the same time, straight after that goal, and Rennes also made some changes that were happening very close to each other. The match turned a little bit, and the balance on the midfield was starting to lean towards Rennes, which enabled them to have many chances and control the game a little bit better. Basically what happened is that for PSG, young Seny Mayulu came to replace Fabian Ruiz, and I'm slightly biased here, bear with me, because Rennes brought in my fellow countryman Glenn Kamara, and I have been seeing him playing a lot, of course, for our Finnish national team, and last season he was in Leeds, and before that he was in Glasgow Rangers playing in Europe and winning the Scottish League, and that did, in my estimation, change the match towards the end. Or it made a contribution to it. Perhaps we don't have to give it more credit than it deserves, but I think that there was something there that was happening. The rotation that was happening with PSG was basically giving opportunities to young players and kind of seeing through the match and giving rest for some of the key players and so on, while of course Rennes was trying to catch us up. So it was quite normal that towards the end some changes were happening. There was also a little bit unlucky handball in the box. Lucas Beraldo's arm was more or less in a natural position, but perhaps he instinctively leaned a little. So it looked. It's one of those things that no one really understands the rules of handball now. It's to me like someone, if they say that I understand the current handball rule, it's a bit like someone saying that they understand quantum physics. It's not impossible, but it seems incredibly unlikely. So the penalty was given, and our Titi Arnaud Kalimuendo scored, and that of course another great PSG tradition of former players scoring against us. And not just former players, but former academy players. Most famously, of course, Kingsley Coman in the Champions League final, but that is what it is. Rennes then got a ball into the goal for the second time, but there was a similar handball situation there, but in the other direction. Basically, this time it was the hand of Rennes forward. So to the credit of the referee, he was fairly consistent in his calls, and this goal then didn't stand. It was one goal for Rennes either way, from the penalty spot or from this other chance. Both had a little bit of involuntary hand touching, so if one was whistled, the other needed to also be whistled, and that is exactly what happened. I wouldn't have not been too bothered whether it was the goal that was allowed and penalty not given, or the way that it went now. But of course, if it was penalty given and then goal standing, then it would have been a separate matter. But like I said, that's not really something that we need to discuss, because that didn't happen. PSG, by the way, also had another disallowed goal on the second half. It was an offside, but basically 3 disallowed goals in this match, which always adds up to the entertainment of it all. Of course, it usually takes a little bit of time with the VAR checks and things like that, but I think on the whole, it's a kind of, it's more positive than negative thing to happen. Well, here we are. How ready is PSG to play against Arsenal, which is up next? That is the question. Basically very difficult to say. I don't follow English football to the same extent that I enjoy French one, but Arsenal is a project that is a bit further than ours is. They will also have some injury challenges with key players just like us. Martin Odegaard is out, but also the goalkeeper David Raya could be in doubt. Whether he plays or won't, we don't know yet at the time of recording. A bit of the same as with Donnarumma, to be honest with you, although you may know when you hear this. Right now the information has not been confirmed one way or another, but I think that Arsenal is playing today on Saturday as I'm recording. Don't know any details of that match yet. We are waiting to know what the situation is with Vitinha, but personally I would not want to see any risks taken with him because he got an injury during last international break when he was playing for Portugal. Then he was already playing with PSG and now he isn't. So it feels to me like he might have come back too soon because when he was playing for PSG, he wasn't in form very clearly, and the same goes to Desiree Doué. Of course, he was injured, came back, and now is injured again. And I fear that this is exactly how it can happen with players like Nuno Mendes, who missed such a long stretch last season, and before that even also with Presnel Kimpembe. Coming back from injury too quickly, it's just trouble. It's not worth doing it. So I would prefer to see some caution exercised, even if it would compromise this one match as big as it is against Arsenal, because right now, big is not synonymous with important. It's not the same thing. Of course, we want results in every match if possible, but at the same time, what we need to do is to beat the teams that on paper are easier to beat in Champions League and then get some results from these other bigger matches. And that should do. Basically, I do want us to be our best available selves on that day, but I see absolutely no reason to risk a player who isn't ready to play in that match 100%. This is not a final. This seems like an oversight by UEFA, to be honest with you, and they seem to think more matches the better and more matches between top teams even better, but in the old system, when we used to play a match against a big club in the group stage, there often was the question of wanting to win that match because you wanted to win the group. And usually it was that big club that you were competing against to win that group. And then you would get a runner-up from another group on the round of 16 when the knockout stages start, which was likely to be a better option than to play against a group winner as a runner-up ourselves. This has been taken away now. In this new system, of course, we want the best results and we want to play with our dignity intact, but we are not necessarily trying to compete for the absolute top spot in Europe during the league phase. There's no medal for that. We want top 8 and then we take it from there. So I'm not yet convinced that this new system will deliver the only one thing that it has promised us. I hope Donnarumma is available. I think Safonov could be exposed if he's guarding the gate, but I'm very happy with our defense otherwise, and that's not something I have said too much since Thiago Silva left the club 4 years ago in 2020. Vilain Pacho has been a revelation to me. I say this pretty much after every match that I see him playing. So far, he's been really great. You don't necessarily pay too much attention to him, because he doesn't make a song and dance out of him, but the work he does there in our backline is just great. And what it also does, very importantly, this should not be overlooked, is that it allows Marquinhos to focus on his own game rather than everyone else and covering them half of the time. It allows Marquinhos to be his best self, which is not nothing. That's quite important. Nuno Mendes, who is hopefully available in this match, and Achraf Hakimi, they represent the very top of the talent pyramid that exists for their positions in football. We went so many seasons with all sorts of makeshift solutions, but now we have great players on both sides. Not much depth behind them, that's true, but if they are able to play, then I don't really have very many concerns. Midfield with or without Vitinha can work. João Neves has been such a wonderful addition to the squad. With Warren Emery and Fabian Ruiz, they have a solid trio over there, and right now it feels like something clicked with Lee Kang-in, who is such a talented and technical player. His ability with the ball is a joy to watch, and now this position of false 9 could work very well. I think it's certainly the best we have available, and Bakola and Dembele then, of course, on the sides. That's what I expect to happen against Arsenal. Basically, we have a decent starting lineup, especially if Donnarumma and Nuno Mendes are back, for sure, but not a lot bench, to be frank, and this is the concern. Arsenal will be a very good test. As much as I want us to get a good result, it will at the very least be an interesting test for some of these theories that Luis Enrique has been cooking. The season is long, and this is the first time we will face a real top team in the world. No offense to any of the other teams we have played, but this will be a definite step or two up from anything else thus far. While the men's department of PSG first team football is preparing for a trip to the Big Smoke, LD and PSG women are going to sit out the whole campaign. This is nothing short of catastrophic. I'm not being dramatic. Basically, in women's football, still during the season, only the winners of the main leagues will go directly to the group stages, and there's no Europa League or anything like that. So you are either in or out of Champions League, and as we have been many times before, we had to qualify to be part of the group stage because obviously in women's football in France, most often it's Lyon that wins the league. So basically that means that PSG as a runner-up will always have to qualify. There's of course been one time when we did win the championship, and that was really great. I mean, in retrospect, I'm thinking like what an amazing time that was, but that's gone now. So this has happened many times before. There's nothing particularly new about that, and there's also nothing particularly new about that we get relatively difficult opponent. One of the more difficult teams available to play against us in this qualification rounds. This time it was Juventus. Now, PSG should not have difficulties with Juventus, none at all, certainly not in the past. We would have never had them, but while they have been building a project, PSG has left our project incomplete, and I won't get into any details about these two matches because it was all very embarrassing, and to analyze it in any way would sort of dignify the argument that there even was any serious plan involved. The mitigating circumstances are, and I'm really digging quite deep here, that these were 2 out of 3 competitive matches for this team for this season, and they were so far from ready, which of course is our own fault because club, need to know that this is happening and take into consideration and counter it. But it does feel also quite inexplicable to me that the French Premier League, formerly known as Division 1, which has by far the best coefficient in the whole of Europe ahead of any of the other countries, and which consistently have 2 teams in the latter parts of the competition, only get 1 automatic spot in the group stage. But at the same time, if this is how you play, there's no reason to go to the group stages to further embarrass yourself. This was already painful enough. Next year there will be a new system there as well, something similar to the men's side, what we currently are having there. So what is the problem? I mean, we have had issues, many different types of issues at that throughout the years with our men's team, and only very recently we have entered a new era where the decision making is largely with a trusted manager. Far from that, on the women's side, which is overseen by sporting director Angelo Castellassi, who was Leonardo's right-hand man during his second stint as our sporting director. On the men's side, that was between 2019 and 2022. But after his boss's dismissal, he wanted to stay in Paris and became sporting director for PSG Feminines. All this without experience in the women's game. It's easy for some. It's almost feeling almost a little bit jealous for some of these people who are kind of failing upwards in a manner of speaking. It is not saying that you can't succeed in women's football with only experience from the other side, but at the same time, the benefit from this experience in women's football shouldn't be overlooked either. It doesn't translate automatically is what I'm saying, and especially for a sporting director, which is a very different thing to a coach. The business of women's football is not the same as it is on men's side. It's not an easy job, and it has its very own characteristic. I will give you that, but Castellassi's track record is very poor. Not saying that things were much better before him, of course. That would also be a bit disingenuous. And during his reign, there's been few really good signings. I will also have to give him that as a mitigating circumstance. Players like Shaki Cronin, Eva Gettino and Corban Albert, those are really great players that have been hired during this time. I really trust them very much. And then there's some others. The jury is still out. I'm hoping that, for instance, last summer's recruits Romain Lecter and Joe Exettini will provide us with a lot of good times in future. But his recruitment, Castellassi's recruitment, on the whole, have been more characterized by mistake after mistake. Players who sometimes literally don't play for us. For instance, Jamaican defender Alison Swaby was signed on loan in January of 2024 for half a year. But due to some technicality, some undelivered documents in time, she was unable to play at all. She just was there. She was not playing 1 minute. I'm not sure if this was our fault, but it is incredibly embarrassing. And if I would have to guess to which team in the world of women's football something like this would happen, I wouldn't expect the odds to be against it being us. We have had players who have barely stepped on the grass. Young Lina, Lee Meng-Wen, Nicole Payne, Berling Turvalsdottir, Marina Georgieva and Anna Vittoria. These were players who were signed but for one reason or another weren't seen good enough after seeing them on the training ground. It's pretty remarkable. It really is something that could not very easily happen in men's football because it's taken more seriously. Of course, there's far more information available also, but this is too many mistakes to happen. Then we, of course, had relatively high-profile signings, and these players were sort of failing to make the positive impact, certainly on a level that we needed from them. Sarah Boadi, the goalkeeper from Lyon, and Ligue Martens both arrived in Paris either with lack of motivation or with some other thing holding them back, whatever it may have been. Boadi famously haven't liked us very much, while Lyon player and both of these players have probably made more money from us than half of the players who have been actually giving us their all, who have been playing far more matches and just trying to do something. And I'm very much hoping that our new goalkeeper Mary Earps is not going to be part of this category. I hope she's going to be part of the category of those successful signings that have come up. I will have to say that it's very early days and it's certainly not her fault that things have gone this way. So far, I haven't seen her yet, catching any ball that was on its way to goal that Katerina Kirchinek would not have also saved. Of course, Kasia, as she's also known, was incredibly good in the preseason tournament in Perth in the final. Well, it was only 2 matches, but it was so-called final against Manchester City, and she was basically stopping all the balls. Remarkable character, very good goalkeeper, but just somebody who really loves PSG and is willing to sacrifice for the badge. So far, I hate to say it, I'm not sure if Mary Earps is in fact in any kind of improvement to her. But I trust. I'm going to give her much more of a chance, and I think she seems like a jovial, good character who is not going to give up. And I hope things are going to get better. All these things happened very quickly after her arrival to a new country that she wasn't used to, language, all of that stuff. But yeah, I'm hoping that she's not going to be in the same category as these players, Liike Martens. And I hate to say that because Liike Martens was the best player in women's football some years ago. But that was some years ago. Sarah Boadi never really cared about her, and I don't think that she should have ever come to Paris. Yeah, so less high-profile people who came in, not, this kind of globally well-known stars or whatever, but they were like Australian Claire Hunt, the centre-back, and Aisa Tunkar, also a defender. But they were players with some profile, but I don't think that they ever had what it takes to compete on the highest level. That's just the way that it goes. Last Thursday, as we were being spanked by Juventus for the second time within 1 week, which really isn't a team that should have any right to compete with us, as I was mentioning earlier, they had 3 of our quote-unquote failures on the pitch, all performing very well. Former PSG players who never got a chance. Viola Galigaris from Switzerland, Amalie Vangsgaard from Denmark, and Estelle Cascarino, of course, French defender. Vangsgaard was playing off position for the most part in Paris, but she did get some minutes, even if not on her best position. But both Cascarino, not to be confused with her more famous twin sister, and Galigaris were basically considered as players who have nothing to give us, despite never really giving them that much of an opportunity to prove us wrong. And all of them were performing against us, if you can believe it, probably with some extra motivation and vengeance. Who knows? During this time of Castellazzi also we have lost key players like Kadi Dudiani and Tapita Chawinga, both huge difference makers, but both went to domestic rivals OL. That is like having Angel Di Maria and Kylian Mbappe going to Marseille. That's what we're talking about here, if you can make a direct comparison, but that's essentially what we're talking about here. OL has the pull, and at some point players get tired. I mean, sometimes players come the other way too, but Lyon poaching our stars is a tale as old as their reign on the top of the women's football. I think what bothers me the most in all of this is how incredibly cliched and predictable it all is. No creativity, no innovation, and from the look of things, I will be the least surprised person if Marie-Antoinette Katoto goes there to Lyon, because she doesn't really seem very attached to our squad either. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. I hope that this is the emotional turmoil and frustration that just makes me to entirely misread the situation. But if it happens, it is something that then will have happened, and it doesn't surprise me very much at all. Previously, some of our reliable players, last season even, Sandy Baltimore or Jean-François, were, according to the word on the streets, offered such a poor deal for extension that both left to Chelsea. Both exactly the type of players who could have helped us against Juventus. Not necessarily world-class players, although I do think that they're a very safe pair of hands or feet, whatever you call it, especially Sandy Baltimore last season even, and many seasons before that, really the most technically skilled and able player in PSG for many years, I think. Not necessarily the best, but incredibly technical, very reliable, and they certainly were not replaced by world-class players. So it's not like, we let them go to have better players to replace them. They were hardly replaced at all, actually, especially from our attack where Baltimore had been for many, many years. We lost last season players like Tabitha Chawinga, Baltimore herself, of course, Wangskort, who I mentioned, went to Juventus, and Liike Martens, who admittedly wasn't delivering much for us. She will soon be delivering a baby, and I wish her and her partner all the best for that. There's nothing personal here, of course, but also she isn't now part of our attack. And also, if you add to that in January of this year, during the January window, Ramona Bachmann left, and all this was replaced by two players. Decent players, hopefully great players for the future, but one of them is basically a target player only, which we already have in Katoto, so now there needs to be some great visionary to line these players up, and here's a spoiler alert, our coach Fabrice Briel is not that visionary, and his lineups against Juventus were as incomprehensible as they were unforgivable. While things weren't perfect before Castellasi took the office, they have been getting worse and worse, and now we are missing the Champions League entirely this season. That is catastrophic. There's no nice way to say about it. We deserve better, and the players deserve better, although I'm far from happy with the bunch of them. It's not like they were playing so amazingly and somebody else was just compromising and sabotaging them. We had some great players there who were essentially not playing that well, who were not delivering. So I'm thinking that even if the system would be confusing, there needs to be something. There needs to be something from the players. At the end of the day, of course, it is Nasser Al-Khelaifi who is the only supervisor, only superior in this whole organization to Castellasi, and he decides the fate of this section. If he prioritizes it and is serious about hiring competent sporting director or even directors, because the assistant and our club legend Sabrina Delanoy hasn't covered herself in glory either, although I generally don't know how much power she has had, so it's difficult to say. So if Nasser ensures that we have a coach that can do it, we can have a top team, but at this rate our long-suffering key players will keep on leaving, and every summer our first challenge is not to improve the team, but to find replacement to those players who have left, which means that we never really significantly improve the whole team. We're just trying to replace the players that have left. And like I said, last summer, some exciting players, but I don't think that we even managed to replace the ones who left. How can this happen in a big club, ambitious organization as PSG is? Well, first of all, most fans don't put a lot of pressure on things like this to improve because a lot of fans don't really care about this very much. That's just something that happens. I don't think that Nasser Al-Khelaifi cares very much either. This is just treated as such an afterthought. I was talking about this online on Twitter, as I have many times before, and I was saying that what I don't get is that if you want to do a sports washing project, wouldn't having the top team in women's football be an excellent way for doing it? But Wale, who is a previous guest on PSG Review, somebody that I talked to online about these things many times, said something that really clarified it all to me. She said that this is not about marketing, this is about corporate social responsibility and hitting those targets. Corporate social responsibility. It's seen, or so it seems, like a charity endeavor to pursue just enough to look like you care. That would explain a lot. I don't know if it's true, but that would explain a lot. And it's true that women's football isn't the same business as men's football is. We keep on hearing that. But then men's football in France is not the same business as it is in England. And I don't see why we should just shrug our shoulders and not care. Football is football, and women's football has a lot of potential. Things can happen, and things are currently happening in women's sports, especially in England when it comes to football, but even in WNBA, in the North American basketball. Don't say it's impossible. I heard some murmurs that there's been a crisis meeting held at PSG, and I expect to see some change in personnel soon enough, because the best thing we can do right now is to kickstart a new era today, because yesterday's mistakes remain as they are, but we have the future. But we do need to make the change at some point if you want better results. Thank you so much for listening to PSG Review. We have a big week, a huge week ahead of us in terms of the Champions League match against Arsenal on Tuesday, and then on Sunday we will be playing against Nice, and both of those matches will be on the road. Hopefully the short-term injuries are overcome and nothing new occurs, nothing serious to put anyone to the infirmary for a long time, or even for a short time. I certainly hope that would be the case. My name is Mikko, this is PSG Review. Like, share, rate, review, recommend, and listen if you please. Online, I am at PSG Review Pod on Twitter and at PSG Review on TikTok and Instagram, and you can also email me if you want. psgreview.podcast@gmail.com. That is psgreview.podcast@gmail.com. More next time, and until that, peace.